Latita Smith, President and CEO of the Moses Taylor Foundation. So I asked Latita, what is your biggest frustration when it comes to engaging you about funding or submitting a grant? And she said, when organizations don't reach out ahead of time. So this is your ahead of time opportunity, not in the masses, but perhaps afterwards in the hallway. We'll give you a little bit of a runway, a little bit of a pitch to Latita to learn more about what you're doing and opportunities to work together. Before we get started, I just wanted to thank Athena Ardwig, who's my new team member in the back. She was outside taking registration, so I couldn't thank her before. But most of today's preparation, Athena's taken care of, so thank you, Athena. After we go through the panelists today, again, I mentioned the buffet will be outside. There's sliders. There'll be a variety of different sliders, a donut bar, and some salads. So, okay? There is a real bar, but... Thank you, Latita.
Thank you, Kurt. So this is the end of our third year of grant making, and this is actually my third Meet the Funders. And so I was a little bit nervous when Kurt asked me to do this again because I felt like, you know, you've all heard me before. And in fact, it actually made me think of the song Benny and the Jets. I don't know if you know this song. It's an Elton John song. But my kids have this habit of falling in love with the song. And when they fall in love with the song, they want to play it all the time. So it's in the car. It's the song they want to hear before they go to bed, the first thing in the morning. And like my husband and I have a variety of types of music that we enjoy. And it is my husband, not I, although I like Elton John, who has a particular affinity for Benny and the Jets. And so, like for the past, it has been probably at least a month, we have Benny and the Jets on repeat in our home. And in fact, it has become so bad that my husband has taught my children to actually use it as a weapon. So if we are at the grocery store and they want a candy bar and we're in the checkout aisle and I say, no, you can't have it, they'll start singing Benny and the Jets. And so it embarrasses me in the store. At home, they can do it and I just walk away. But if you ever hear like a kid singing Benny and the Jets at the grocery store and like a parent darting away, you'll know that I'm probably somewhere near. So I don't want to be Benny and the Jets. I don't want to be a refrain of something that you've heard before. And so many of you are familiar faces. You are grantees or organizations that we've talked to in the past. But the good thing is, I think that we are at a critical moment in the foundation's history. We're at kind of a pivot right now as we're completing our first strategic plan. And so we will be doing our work in a different way. And so I want to talk for like 1 second about what we have done to date. Because an important part of that work will continue. But then I do want to spend the rest of my time talking about the work that is to come for Moses Taylor Foundation. So where we were established in 2012. I said we were established in 2012, but really this is our third year of grant making because in our first few years, we were satisfying some of our outstanding obligations to the Moses Taylor Hospital system from which we were established. So our grant making really began in earnest in 2015. Our mission is to improve the health and well-being of Northeast Pennsylvania. We have approximately $80 million in assets. Our giving is around $3.2 million a year. Kurt, you're like in the way. Quality control, okay. And our footprint, we have an 11-county footprint. We are based in Lackawanna County. We have a commitment to Lackawanna County. This is where the hospital is, but we have an 11-county footprint that we continue to fund in. So our grant making up until now has been 100% responsive. So nonprofits submit requests to us as they fit our broad areas of interest. And those 5 areas are and will continue to be our primary focus. Primary health care, behavioral health, oral health care, the healthcare workforce, and human services that promote good health. That is our focus. And we do grants in 2 ways. We have our quarterly grants, so on a quarterly basis, Grant requests are submitted, or proposals are submitted through our website, and those dates are there. Those are the general dates, so like it's not actually July 1, it's like the business day that follows it. And then we make discretionary grants up to $20,000 on a rolling basis, so you can submit those at any time. We try to turn those over within 4 to 6 weeks or so. So that has been the entire way that we have made grants to date. Moving forward, we are also going to be spending, we'll be spending half of our resources on the traditional responsive grants, and the other half of our grant-making resources will be spent on our strategic initiatives. And the thing that makes these initiatives different are that they are proactive. So whereas in our responsive grants, we are responding to the community's interest, with our strategic initiatives, the foundation has really said, this is what we want to accomplish. And we're inviting partners to come together with us to make a difference around these areas that we believe are critical priorities for the community. Now, we didn't do these in isolation. We absolutely selected these areas in concert with discussions with our community partners, and we're continuing to engage partners around the best way of achieving success in both of these areas. But the foundation is really taking a lead role in a way that we don't in our routine responsive grants. These are also 5-year initiatives for us, so we are committed to supporting these projects from 2019 through 2023. We intend that each initiative will have a common agenda, so we will, with our partners, determine what we believe is the best way to expand school-based health, what we believe is the best way to prevent senior isolation, and then we will have shared goals and common outcomes that we and a group of partners will work together to achieve. And we're also going to be looking to leverage the support of multiple funders. So our foundation will commit half of our grant-making resources to these efforts over the next 5 years, but we don't intend that we'll do it alone. We will be working in partnership with other local funders. We will also be working with national funders to achieve these goals. And we will also be dedicating fundraising resources. So we will bring on board to assist us external fundraisers who will be actively out there writing grants and doing research to identify funding opportunities as they advance both of our 2 strategic initiatives. So I want to spend a little time just talking about each initiative and what we mean by these projects. And I should say that we are in a strategic planning process. It's funny because my friend Ryan said, oh, you must be so happy the process is over. And it's like, well, I'm kind of happy, but it's not over. We're actually at a midway point. So our board and staff spent the last 6 months determining number one, we determined how did we want to think about our grant making moving forward, and that's where we landed on the 50% responsive and 50% strategic. And then we also went through a process of determining what the 2 priorities were going to be. So that took us 6 months, so now we're here. But now that we're here, we're going to spend the next 6 months determining what are going to be the specific strategies that we are going to pursue over the next 5 years in both of those areas. So we brought on a phenomenal strategy development consultant. Christine Marcos is in the front row. She's going to be working with us over the next 6 months to help us figure out what is the best path forward in both of these strategy areas, and that's something that we're really looking for a variety of partners to help us figure out. So where we are now with regard to school-based health. We know that health outcomes and academic outcomes are inextricably linked. That very often the same things that impact how well a kid does in school has everything to do with how well they're doing within their bodies, within their homes, the health and wellness of that kid. We also know that the school plays a great role in supporting the health of children and helping to establish healthy behaviors and promoting health education, and also increasingly the degree to which schools are able to provide an access point for obtaining physical health care as well as behavioral health, their role in nutrition. So many kids, especially kids in more challenged communities, are getting 2 out of 3 meals a day in their schools. And so we recognize that the school has a great role to play in supporting kids' health. We also know that schools are already playing a role in managing kids' health, that often kids are coming to school with chronic conditions like asthma and diabetes, and that schools are already having to play a role in helping them address their healthcare needs. And so when we think about how we might play a role in expanding school-based health, one of the key things that we're really interested in is thinking about school-based health centers. We have had a phenomenal partnership with the Wright Center where we've helped to expand a school-based health center that they had established at West Scranton Intermediate School. The great thing about that health center is that it is, we were able to retrofit the space so that it now has an external entrance, because nowadays for a host of safety reasons, any adult can't just walk into a school. But now they have an external entrance so that not only are kids in the school building able to utilize the services of the school-based health center, but also their parents, their siblings, other people in the community also have access to the school-based health center. So it's a phenomenal model. It's a model that we see an opportunity to replicate. But we're not, trying to just pop up a whole bunch of school-based healthcare centers all across our footprint. We don't necessarily think that's the right fit for every community. And we're thinking of school-based health much more broadly than that. So we're also thinking about, what's on the menu? How can we help schools provide more nutritious meals? What's the approach to health education? It's really spotty in a lot of places. It's often the first thing that gets cut. How are parents engaged around supporting the health of their kids? What opportunities exist for physical activity for kids? Do they have recess? What do the playgrounds look like? What kind of counseling and social service supports are available within the school building? So we really want to take a comprehensive look at how do we help schools become healthier environments for kids. And so what are some of the outcomes that we think that we'll be able to measure? Well, there are a range of things that the data shows are direct effects of supporting the health of kids in school buildings. Everything from decreased absenteeism, increased rates of vaccination, and increased rates of seeing the doctor and access to health care, increased parent engagement, improved academic performance, and then an enhancement of healthy behaviors like engaging in physical activities, consumption of healthy food, better management of chronic health conditions. Again, this is right now we have like a menu of things that we are considering, and I think that through the conversations that we're having with local partners, we really hope to determine which ones of these outcomes, which one of the interventions we collectively believe is really the best fit for our work moving forward. Preventing senior isolation. So in preventing senior isolation, we're really excited about having discussions and raising awareness about isolation as a social determinant of health. A lot is talked about with regard to social determinants of health, and we know that where you live, safety, security, all those things directly impact the health of individuals. But it's not often that isolation is talked about in the same way. But as we've done research on the topic, it's been very interesting for us to find direct correlations between isolation and everything from rates of chronic disease and high blood pressure, rates of Alzheimer's and other cognitive impairments, poor sleep, high use of emergency services. I mean, for us, social isolation, particularly for seniors, is at this cross-section of looking at both their physical health as well as their behavioral health, and really thinking about isolation as this social determinant of health for older adults. And so when we talk about isolation for adults, we're not just talking about loneliness, like do you feel lonely? Isolation is thought about with regard to 3 different kinds of connections that seniors often have, and that the absence of can put them at risk for some of the adverse effects that I mentioned previously. So do you have instrumental connections? Those are the kind of connections that you have in your life that help you get transportation. Are you able to get where you need to go? Do you have access to food, help with bill paying, help with medical adherence? Those kind of instrumental connections are vital for seniors to live healthy lives. Do they have emotional connections? So are there people that they can talk to, that you have trusting relationships with, and empathy? Often, especially for older adults, when they get to a point that their friends are no longer around, finding someplace to provide those emotional connections is really critical. And then informational connections. Do you have access to the resources that you need at the time that you need it? Do you have guidance and advice and support? And so when we think about isolation, we're not just talking about how an individual feels. And to some degree, We do want to measure people's perceived feelings of loneliness because that's important and it matters. But then we also look at how can you quantify and estimate the level of those other kind of vital connections that seniors have. Because sometimes, like I know thinking about my own grandma, she would say, I'm fine, I like living alone. You know, I don't want anybody coming to my house. You know, you just come over every Saturday and everything's good. And that's fine. But at the same time, we want to make sure that the older adults in our community have the other connections that are vital to helping them live full lives. And so how will we do this? There are a variety of things that the literature has told us work well to prevent senior isolation. So everything from making sure that we have reliable and adaptable screening tools. So is there a way that we can make sure that all medical providers are screening older adults for isolation and loneliness? Can we make sure that social service providers who are interacting with older adults are also doing this screening so that we're able to identify it and hopefully get it early on? Providing education for healthcare providers. So, I mean, certainly they may recognize that someone is isolated, but helping the medical providers make the connection for the older adult, not just, oh, I see that you're feeling lonely, but, you know, directly recognizing that this can have an impact on your health and well-being. Improving neighborhood accessibility, improving faith-based outreach. Often when older adults don't have connections to other things, they have connections to their place of worship. So how do we work with the faith-based community? Providing support for caregivers, both seniors who are themselves a caregiver, as well as other folks and family members who may be caring for their family member. Providing on-time information and referral services so that people know where to get the help that they need. And public health messages to help reduce stigma. There's a lot of stigma associated with loneliness, and so talking about it out loud, talking about the negative effects that it can have, I think is another valuable contribution that we might be able to make to this issue. So when we talk about isolation, it's important that we recognize that there are a number of factors that put someone at risk for being isolated. So living alone is one of the things, but it's not just living alone. It could also be potentially having impaired mobility, a major life transition, losing a job, the death of a partner, being a caregiver. So if you are an older adult caring for, you know, another older adult, that can put you at particular risk of being isolated. Having a low income just often also has a correlation between having not the best access to other resources. Living in an inaccessible neighborhood, and a neighborhood could be inaccessible either because it could be in a rural community or it could be an urban community that is unsafe. Language barriers, often people at risk for isolation, as well as being a member of a minority group. So a racial or ethnic minority group, a religious minority group, being part of the LGBT community, all of these things can put seniors at increased risk of isolation. There's a lot of challenge around defining it, also challenges around even identifying isolated people, because by the definition, it can be hard to reach these people, and as I mentioned before, the stigma associated with loneliness. So what outcomes have been demonstrated? In both cases, with both our Kids Initiative and our Senior Initiative, we not only want to look at a variety of interventions, but also a variety of outcomes, because we want to be really clear about what we hope to achieve over the next 5 years. And so we'll be looking at outcomes ranging from reduced stigma, reported reduced loneliness and depression. We hope that the direct interventions that we may implement with older adults will help to reduce hospital readmissions, increase access to care, help increase the number of social connections, improve participation in a range of healthy activities. And so what's next for us? So we just announced our initiatives last month, and so we're really excited that a number of people have already expressed interest in working with us. You can also sign up at our website to receive more information about one or both of our initiatives if you want to stay on the mailing list so you can hear what we're up to. For the next several months, we'll be in this process of recruiting partners. We are meeting one-on-one with organizations who are already engaged in doing this work, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We know that there's a lot of good stuff already happening, and we want to find where we can add value, what our partners see as the missing links or the best way for the foundation to invest in these priorities. We're also continuing to review external literature to understand better about best practice and really determine what's the best approach for our community to take. And then in September, we're going to hold 2 retreats where we are going to bring together all of our senior partners and all of our kids partners, and we're going to come together to hopefully help create a common agenda. So of the myriad of things that we might consider, some of which I mentioned and some of which I may not even know about yet because we haven't come across it, what do our partners believe are the places that we should invest in? And so we're going to have 2 half-day meetings to help us determine, what are those key priorities, and then we'll be using that to develop the foundation's strategic plan, which we hope to present to our board in December. And so I think, yeah, in a nutshell, that's where we are. I'm really looking forward to opportunities to talk more about what we're engaged in. In your handouts, I believe that you have a Q&A that talks a little bit more about what this means for the foundation and our work moving forward.
Next up, we have Mike. Mike's biggest frustration when folks are engaging him about grants or funding, he mentioned time. Is that how much time it takes? Wait, use the microphone. Can you elaborate?
Let's leave it here. When I say, is this on? Tilt it up. When I say time, can you hear me? Okay. What I'm referring to is the time it takes to process, evaluate, analyze, understand, get acquainted with you, possibly if we have to do more research before we make a decision.
Thank you. And Mike's most rewarding experience is the Signature Day of Caring event. Could you talk more about that?
Yeah, let me elaborate on that. We're actually working on our 19th, 20th, and 21st signature event this year. And what that event looks like, it's a significant investment into a nonprofit organization or a school, and we're trying to change the landscape of that particular community or school, an elementary school, by having a series of projects. The projects could be as simple as painting. They can be as complex as installing a 3D printer, purchasing and installing the technology. Some of the projects we have done also include virtual reality technology so kids can take a field trip within a classroom. So the focus of the signature event is really to improve the community in one day with multiple projects and with providing the capital that's needed to drive it, plus bringing together between 100 and maybe 150 volunteers, Wells Fargo team member volunteers, to complete all these assignments. It's very fulfilling. And yes, that's one of the greatest things we've done as a company. I get to participate in, I get to lead them, and as I said, this year we'll have completed by the end of the year our 21st so-called activity. And the investment is huge. It could be as little as $50,000 to fund all this. It could be as large as $100,000. It all depends on the budgets we have and the projects and the needs that we're uncovering as we talk to community stakeholders, leaders. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And okay, you'll give everybody an overview on how to approach the Wells Fargo Foundation and more about your giving activities.
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, Wells Fargo is more than just its foundation. We have to go back a couple of steps. Wells Fargo is a large financial services company. and we're focused on social responsibility. And when we focus on social responsibility, we're focusing on a couple of areas: leadership, engagement, philanthropic investment, credit, and service into our communities. And when we say communities, we mean where we live and work, where we have branches, where we have offices, where we live. And as a result of our focus on social responsibility, we've determined the focus really needs to be to improve the community, strengthen the community. Why? It makes business sense for all of us. If we live in a strong community, a thriving community, our business platform will do fine, and so will all the others. People will be improving, one family at a time. That's the gist of what we try to do. The foundation plays a role in that, and I'll jump to the foundation. Our foundation, Wells Fargo Foundation, the Wells Fargo Regional Foundation, the Wells Fargo Housing Foundation. When we combine all these foundations together, they're typically giving annually about $180 million. We're typically in the top 3 of givers each year, year after year. We're the #1 United Way giver. That's phenomenal. Also, in the giving, we give team member service hours. And in our model, every team member is allowed to be away from their job 16 hours a year, paid, to do some sort of volunteer activities. It's neat. And as volunteers last year, the company provided 1.8 million service hours. And we locally, in the markets that I champion, we're always close to about 20,000 service hours with the team members that I get to be around. And that's phenomenal. So our company lets us do these things. Now, let's talk about the foundations. That's why we're here, what they do, how to access them, what their focuses are. The Wells Fargo Foundation is our general foundation. Again, it's a diverse group of people that oversee the foundation, diverse and inclusive, and we have committees. They're localized. We also have a national committee. And I'll talk more of the local giving. I represent 3 committees in the markets that I am seated in and travel to. And with those committees, we make decisions based on the following. Is there an economic impact? Is there a community development impact? Is it education oriented? Is it health and human services driven? Is it about arts and culture? And we also look at grants that impact or want to improve the environment. So those are the focus areas of the foundation. Grant size. A size grant coming out of this foundation, Wells Fargo Foundation, they can range from as little as $1,000, maybe as high as $20,000. Average grant, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000. There are many, many organizations, nonprofit 501c3 organizations that are applying for the grants. Vetting the grants is exciting for the group. We know we're going to impact the community based on the grants we select. The process to select the grants really has to do with our needs assessment. We do annual needs assessments, and our needs assessments are tied somewhat to CRA, Community Reinvestment Act. We're looking at strengthening geographic areas, individuals that are at risk in low and moderate income classifications. So as we vet the grants, we're looking for organizations, and again, those focus areas that I just mentioned, that are going to have a significant impact on these groups of individuals, plus the general population in those focus areas. And then we take it a step further. we're looking for some collaboration and collective impact. What are other nonprofits doing? Are you working together with another group? Does your work benefit more than one constituency that you might represent? So it gets complicated. So when Kurt asked me about time, yeah, I don't have enough time to possibly do all the research. So to improve your probability of obtaining an application, and our applications are all online. We operate under the cyber grant system, so you go into wellsfargo.com, click on About Us, click on In the Community or Corporate Investment, and it'll take you into the foundations. Select the foundation you want. I'll talk about the other two in a second. But again, we're looking at the impact of what your organization is doing, its reach, its breadth, and you need to tell us in the description area what you're doing, how you're reaching people, and then what's the impact on those people that you're reaching. And if we can get a good vibe out of that, that's going to make a great discussion for the dozen or so decision makers that are a part of our contribution council to vet that grant. Now I'm going to switch foundations. The Wells Fargo Housing Foundation. The Housing Foundation is focused on homebuyer education, housing, safe, affordable housing. It's also focused on what we call a team member volunteer program. And under that program, we are either building new or we're rehabbing or repairing existing housing stock. And we're doing it in conjunction with a affordable housing nonprofit specialist. We have one in the room today. We have NeighborWorks, Northeastern Pennsylvania. We do this team member volunteer program project type with them. And under that type, we are bringing resources, capital, to the organization to invest in targeted homes. They may be occupied by a family or they may be vacant. And they need to qualify as a low or a moderate income, either geography or a family. And we're going to change the landscape of that house so it can become safe and affordable and then accommodate a qualified family if it's not a repair situation. And we typically, in that foundation, set aside about $7 million, and we fund it as little as $10,000, $15,000, and $20,000 tranches into these homes. We're looking for other organizations to fund with us to create a new dynamic for that house, for that blighted property, in that neighborhood, for that community. That's the gist of the program and why we do it. Jess, thanks. You're a great partner. The third foundation is the Wells Fargo Regional Foundation. The Wells Fargo Regional Foundation provides two types of grants. Its focus is to basically rejuvenate, revitalize a low-income neighborhood or community through these grants that I'll talk about in a second, by making programmatic improvements to the neighborhood that will lead to systemic change in the neighborhood. These are collaborative efforts. They're run and directed by the neighborhood stakeholders, which would be the residents and the nonprofits that reside in the neighborhood. Collectively, they come up with a neighborhood plan. That's the one grant, the planning grant. And then when that planning grant or plan is completed and the planning grant is funded, with that consultant and that neighborhood stakeholder group, they can then apply for an implementation grant for the plan, which it will then carry out some of the details of the plan, will fund some of the details of the plan through program funding. So we're going to be funding individuals and supporting the programs these individuals are bringing to the neighborhood because they're absent or they need to be strengthened. That is what the Wells Fargo Regional Foundation does. The grant sizes for a planning grant could be as little as $25,000, could be as high as $75,000. The implementation grant is a multi-year grant. Usually they're 5 years. And the total grant size can run as little as $250,000 up to $1.2 million. What we're looking for in these implementation grant applications is collaboration, and we want our grant to basically be the catalyst of investment to create more investment. We're the seed money to transform this community over time. There also is a continuation grant, because sometimes it's difficult to withdraw the resources after you've been funding into a neighborhood, into organizations for, let's say, 5 years. So there is a continuation grant that could be also considered. So Wells Fargo has many, many things to offer. In addition to the philanthropy, I always talk about volunteerism, team member engagement, leadership. If you have some of these things going for you within your organization, it improves the odds of getting a grant approved, because we've moved from a transactional relationship, so to speak, to more of a transformational relationship by having team members involved in what you're doing as a volunteer on a committee, maybe a board member as an exception, and collectively we're trying to change the community through this connection, through this participation. Thank you. Thanks, Kurt.
This one is better, so actually use this one. Okay. It's a little stronger. Mark said. Last but not least, we saved the IndyCar fan for last because he said he'd be quick. Okay. So again, I asked Kevin some of the same questions as the other funders. Biggest frustration, the lack of follow-up, sharing with us the impact a project delivers once it's funded. So I could speak for most of the audience. Many of us have a very difficult time once a grant is complete with that follow-up activity, but it's very important to let our funders know how well or how successful your grant was. One, for gratification, letting the funders and trustees know how important it is, and two, sometimes just a photo of an event, a photo of someone you served, a testimonial, any type of activity like that will help you maintain your relationship with your funders. The most rewarding experience, Kevin noted, was the formation of the Lackawanna Housing Consortium, where the Margaret Briggs Foundation and Scranton Area Foundation challenged many of the local housing organizations to partner together on activities. Probably formed 20 years ago?
Yeah, probably.
And it's probably one of the longest lasting collaborations in the region. And because there's a lot of groups in certain spaces, funders wanted to see the group to unify and prepare one solid application meeting the region's needs versus having to review, vet, and fund 10 or 15 separate applications. I think most people who are users of those services would agree that it probably works out better in the long run, and it's probably more efficient. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kevin. Thank you.
Thanks, Kurt. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you. So I really enjoyed the presentations earlier this morning, and hopefully I will get us back on time. The first question that everyone asks me about the Margaret Briggs Foundation is, who is Margaret Briggs? And I never had the opportunity to know her, but she was a social worker by training, and she was an only child, and I think she did not have any cousins either. So all the family's wealth funneled down to her, and as a social worker, she really wanted to give back to the community. So in the 1980s, she created the Walmart Foundation in honor of her parents, Walter and Margaret. And after she passed away, the name was, the trustees at that time changed the name to the Margaret Briggs Foundation. The original the charter members of the foundation were Joe Cretter, Matt Mackey, and Tom Gallagher. And at the time, Northeastern Bank had an at-large seat. So there were 4 charter members of the original foundation. The current board consists of 5 members, myself, Bill Kalpin, who's the longest tenured member, Jim Fleming, Judy Graziano, and John Cosgrove. We're all volunteers, so there's very little expense to the foundation. So all the money that we have goes into the community. All the money that we need to give away goes into the community. The bank, the PNC Bank, is gracious enough to give us office support. They'll do typing for us and give us free office space and pay postage and things like that. So we are grateful to the bank for that support. The areas that we serve primarily, and I'm going to say generally speaking a lot, because we are not bound by any bylaws or rules that say you have to fit into this box. But generally speaking, we support organizations in Lackawanna County that support the human needs or human services. That doesn't mean we won't give to the arts or to education or other needs, but primarily speaking, we fund human services in Lackawanna County. I forgot to mention that Margaret Briggs Foundation is a private foundation. It was funded entirely with Miss Briggs' money, and as a private foundation, we're required to give away 5% of our corpus every year. Currently, the corpus is approximately $13 million. So we give away $650,000 to charities each year. We meet 6 times a year. They're not scheduled meetings. But it's usually every other month. And we had a meeting last month, and we decisioned approximately $200,000 in grants last week. So those checks are in the mail if anyone in here has applied. So they'll be coming soon if you haven't received them already. And our next meeting is in August. So if you have a need in Lackawanna County that helps low to moderate income members of our community, or have a human need, or have a project that is going to have a huge impact on the community, either in terms of community development, economic development, revitalization, just anything that makes the community better. For example, the arts. I said we fund human needs, but we also understand that there is a need to have culture in the community. So when employers are looking to relocate into Lackawanna County, or the chambers of commerce are trying to attract businesses to come to Lackawanna County, we need to show that there is a culture, there is something to do for their employees once they get here. So we do also support the arts. We'd like to see collaboration. We don't like, I shouldn't say we don't like. We enthusiastically like to read grant applications where there are other funders. We really don't want to be the only funder in a transaction. So if you have a project, it could be capital, or it could be program money. We like to see other support going into the application. It just shows that not only are we supporting it, but the community in general is supporting the request. We tend to be very inconspicuous. Many people, you don't see our name out there that much unless you're really in this circle. We try to be inconspicuous. You won't see our picture in the paper often. The only time you'll see our picture in the paper is if it helps you as a grant seeker. If it helps you to show that we're supporting your purpose or your cause, then by all means, we would be happy to participate in your marketing of that. But then this is all about Miss Briggs. It's not about us, and we really try to be. We're inconspicuous. I look forward to your questions, and I should tell you the best way to get in touch with us is I can give you their address. Kurt, it's not in the program anywhere, is it? Okay. The address is Margaret Briggs Foundation, P.O. Box 937, Scranton, Pennsylvania 18501. Or you can email me. And I just ask that in the subject line, put Margaret Briggs Foundation so that it doesn't get lost in all my other emails. But my email address is krogers, R-O-G-E-R-S, @pncbank.com. And if you have a request, just send me an email, brief description, and I will be happy to send you a grant application. Thank you.
We'll promise to send out links and contact information for all of our panelists as a follow-up to this. Please consider filling out your evaluations. What I'd like to do is ask the panelists to go grab lunch before everybody else so that they're able to eat before we start bombarding them with questions. Okay? Thank you. Okay, folks, we're going to open up the questions and answers session. Thank you all for staying. So we had one question brought to us anonymously. So, to the funders, does an organization not based in the aforementioned counties but provides services and programming to residents from those counties, would they be considered for funding?
Wells Fargo, yes.
We would definitely entertain any opportunity to help individuals in Lackawanna County.
So sometimes, for us, it depends on if there's a real knowledge of the community. So sometimes we'll get requests from statewide organizations or organizations based in other parts of Pennsylvania who want to do work in our counties. And so we're always interested in finding out, do you really know this community? Like, do you really get the needs here? Do you have board members who are here? Or are you just, trying to encroach on a territory that you don't really understand? So I would say maybe.
I'll say in most cases, yes, simply because we recognize that with a lot of issues with telecommuting and, organizations starting to get locations centralized, doing a lot of work out of one location, we would want to ensure that, once we looked at, like Latita had mentioned, once we looked at the amount of allocations going locally, the breakdown, the majority of answers would probably be yes.
Latita made a good point. If we're already funding organizations and they're doing a certain scope of work and they're helping certain clients that we deemed needy, and if another organization from outside the area is trying to affect the area, they would be evaluated very thoroughly, because we really don't want to fund or have a competition amongst nonprofits. That's not healthy. We'd rather see a collaboration. They could join in on what the other group might be doing, but that would be of concern. If they come and they do this work and they're effective, what happens to the other organization? And so you have to evaluate all those things, and it's going to play into the decisioning. Very good answer. Your answer.
Okay. Anybody else? We're going to use the microphone as we're recording the session, so question? Can you give your name and organization when you ask?
Okay. Erwin Guberman, Milford Presents, and Pocono Foxtrot. For Pocono Foxtrot, they are not a 501c3. That sounded like all of you insist on that. Is okay. I like the way your head is shaking. How can they take advantage of grant money that you offer?
Yeah, it depends. It depends on what foundation you're coming into. NEPA Healthcare Foundation, you'd have to be a 501c3. SPITS, You have to be a 501c3. Scranton Area Foundation, there's some flexibility there. We've funded 501c4s, C6s. We've also funded organizations that haven't yet gotten their 501c3, but they're partnering. So if you can find an organization that you can partner with, absolutely, we've done that in many cases, that we would fund an organization that's in that building phase of getting there. But there just has to be a partnering organization that has some level of, ideally C3, but C4, C6. And you know, the purpose of many of us looking at C3s is because we have those assurances built in, you know, for cross-checking and things like that. But there is flexibility.
Can you describe the process of partnering that? Because everybody has mentioned it today.
Absolutely. So often, and I'm just going to speak for our own purposes, you know, an organization that has some aspects of what they're working in, you know, whether it's seniors, children, et cetera, depending on the area, will find an organization that has some synergy with it. Maybe that they touch the population in a certain way. They have, you know, that's their audience, that's their stakeholder base, their client base, but they don't necessarily provide that exact service, but that there'd be a mutually way, either that, you know, if you found I don't know a lot about your particular organization because I'm in a different region, but I'm sure if you thought about, you know, your service areas and service clientele, you'd be able to think about organizations that might be able to have a similar client base that you could work with. Now, that might be a mutuality, that there might be a dualistic reason, maybe both will get something, maybe both will get something out of it. Or, in many cases, we've seen organizations that will do it as somewhat of a favor to another organization that's starting to get to that point. So really, there's a lot of different ways you can look at that if you're trying to build a funding base. Sure.
We mentioned 501c3s, and that really is a deciding factor.
Same for our foundation. You have to be a 501. We've done a couple of C4s, but mostly it's 501c3 organizations, because we'll ask for a copy of your determination letter from the IRS.
Hi, Jesse Ergot, NeighborWorks, Northeastern Pennsylvania. My question is around sustainability. So I know many foundations are looking for opportunities to address needs in the community that maybe are unmet. We also know that many of the organizations here struggle with the tension between starting something new or making what you're doing seem new and sustaining the very important mission work that you're already doing and that nobody else is doing. So I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit to, you know, from trends you've seen in philanthropy about how organizations can build sustainable models that kind of fit with the types of giving that you all do and want to do, so that programs that are really important can continue to be funded without you getting the same application year after year from the same organization.
I'll try to start. A couple things. We're getting some directive now with regard to nonprofit leadership funding, leadership development funding, and also capacity building, so that you continue to be effective as an organization. And there's more to come on that. We're just at the beginning stages of that. And as far as sustainability, a foundation's desire to continue to support an application, if you're doing meaningful work and you're creating an impact, as I said, collective impact before, the foundation is going to be hard-pressed to not continue to approve an application, even if it happens to be the same application, might be a different program twist, but yet it's important and it's needed. And we all know that the work that you all are doing, and you're to be commended, it's hard work, there's a lot of heavy lifting, it takes a lot of resources to affect and make better the lives of the people that you all work with. And the foundation decision makers, they know that what you're doing is very important to the community. and they're trying to support your applications based on their parameters, based on the funds that they have available to them to vet out and allocate. It's very difficult. But I want to say thank you for what you do, because if you wouldn't be doing it, our society would be worse off. So we really do appreciate what you do, and we try very hard, in all honesty, to provide resources to you via the foundations so that you can serve those community members that have those needs.
So it's a really tough question, and I know that it's one that we struggle with a lot. Every member of our staff has worked at a nonprofit, so we get it. It is hard to, there's some things that nobody wants to fund, right? Like nobody wants to fund your lights, and nobody wants to fund, the other things that are essential to you delivering the other sexy things that people do want to fund. And so it's really hard for an executive director to kind of piece it all together. I think that as a funder, the thing that we think about is we don't want to be in the business of building extra need in the community. So if I help you expand your program, but there's no sustainability plan, and you expand your program, but there's no sustainability plan, or if 3 organizations want me to help them hire additional staff, I get the need, I get the value, but then who's going to pay for that ongoing? And if we can't pay for that ongoing, then I feel bad about expanding a service that can't be sustained. So I get it. I mean, I think that it is, absolutely wrong when nonprofits feel like they have to provide a new name to an old program just so that it's interesting to a funder. I think that that is wrong. But at the same time, I mean, we ask about sustainability because we want to know if there's going to be an ongoing need for this program. And sometimes, the answer to sustainability is where we're going to keep asking you and other funders, and even for us, that's okay. Like if we see that you have a track record of bringing in a variety of resources from individuals and governments and other funders, then, we're willing to take a leap of faith with you that you've been able to do this in the past and you can do it moving forward. But if you've never gotten other support, and then you're looking for us to kind of help you get something off the ground with no kind of plan at the other end, then we feel that it's not only a disservice that we would do to this organization, but also to the broader community. So that's not easy, but at least that's some of the calculus that we go through when we're thinking about it.
So I think, one of the things that I think is beautiful about philanthropy is we're charged with the ability to be innovative, right? That's part of our corpus at times can be innovative. So I think that, I will agree with a lot of what Latita just said in that we want to be able to play that innovative role in helping organizations, particularly with aspects that are maybe social entrepreneurship or things that, for example, that you've done and other organizations are doing that helps you create an additional revenue stream to supplement grant applications. That being said, we'll also fund an innovative program as long as there's a plan in place. Sometimes I think you have to be willing as funders to look at the if you build it, they will come model and trust that the organization has a plan to make other funders come along. So I do think that we try to balance between that. I will say, though, that foundations that are, small to mid-size, we can never be dependent on a full source for sustainability. We can only be supplementary. Larger foundations, and I'll say fortunately like Weinberg, for example. Weinberg's a foundation that I think has really taken that role in being more of a sustainability funder. And some other ones have as well. But I think we are willing to be that innovative funder to help catalyze initiatives that get you on a path towards sustainability.
And I would just say that there are a number of funders that we provide money to each year that we've been funding for the past 20 years. We get the same application each year. We don't ask them to recreate the same application, put a different name on it. But one of the questions on our application is how will future funding be solicited? And will you be coming back in the future? Because, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And we just don't want organizations creating a request because they think they might be able to get some funding and they're creating a brand new program that really doesn't have any sustainability. We don't want to start something that may or may not be needed.
Okay, next.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you very much for your insights and perspectives. I just had an observation. Maybe you can help address this. Why does it seem that the funder community has perhaps shifted its focus away from supplementing capital construction and renovation projects that are crucial to institutional growth and even sustainability measures?
I'll start with that. Our grants tend to be $5,000 to $25,000. If you're building a $3 million building, we're not going to move the needle. So we may not do bricks and mortar, but we'll furnish a room. I know we buy playground equipment, or like you said, a 3D printer. And so we'll buy the equipment for a room, but we may not do the bricks and mortar type of funding. And the last thing in the world we would want to do is give partial funding and you not be able to complete the project. So therefore, then the money never really gets used like it was intended to. So if you are asking for bricks and mortar, and again, generally we don't do it, but there's that word again, generally. If you did come to us, we would want to see like a full sources and uses to show that you have all the funding in place to complete the project.
What Kevin is saying is industry-wide. However, here's an exception. We did expand. It was a bricks and mortar renovation within an existing building, a home ownership center for one of our nonprofits, and we did give them some proceeds from the foundation to do it. Again, bricks and mortar oriented and some technology, but it's really on more of an exception than the norm that we would do that. I think also that the foundation, and I've been doing this and being a part of this since, say, 2001, and the foundation used to do some bricks and mortar, then they moved to all programs. And I think what Kevin is saying is they're looking for impact, and the bricks and mortar is not giving the foundation the impact that they need. The program is. The person running the program is. And when we look at the cities, the urban centers, and it could be the rural also, you're focusing on people carrying out and delivering programs to satisfy needs. And this is the way the needs are somewhat addressed, and hopefully people are overcoming their situations and improving. And the impact of the bricks and mortar isn't really the same way. You're not impacting a person with that brick and mortar investment, but with the program you are, and you're impacting a lot of people via that.
So we happily fund capital, but I think that industry-wide in philanthropy, it's just not common for many funders to fund capital. I do, however, think that we are very fortunate in this community to have the Weinberg Foundation have Northeast Pennsylvania as one of their target communities, because by charter, I want to say 50% or some big percentage of their funding has to be capital. And so just other communities would die to have that kind of opportunity. And I don't think that they get nearly the volume of requests that they'd like to receive from this region. So I would say always, always think about Weinberg Foundation. They won't be the first ones in, but they could come in a mighty way to assist with capital projects in the region.
So from a community foundation perspective, we don't say no to capital. NEPA Healthcare Foundation doesn't say no to capital, neither does Spitz. But what it looks at is, I think things that were already echoed, I'm going to be repetitive in some ways, but there might be a slight difference. how is the capital going to be used in programmatic delivery, connectivity to the community? Are you looking for just a portion at the end of the capital where the community foundation or another foundation can provide buy-in, but there's already the assurance that you're going to get towards the goal? I have seen the Healthcare Foundation do capital, but again, I think a lot of it comes back to the amount of asks at the time, the pool that's available, the compelling nature of what the capital is going to do to impact programmatic delivery, and then the amount that we or any funder would be asked to be a part of it. You know, so that's my added 2 cents.
I work for 18 years, the past 18 years with Northeast PA Youth for Christ. My question to you guys is, the majority of what we do is in our title. And we work with kids from 9th through 12th grade in schools, basically doing like a youth group, working with unchurched kids. And we've been around for over 20 years now here in Northeast PA. How realistic is it that you would fund something that is majorly, mostly supporting pay for basically pastors and youth workers in the majority of what we do? Some of the other things we do is work with teen parents, and that has more of the, what am I trying to think of, the working with needs for kids, raising teens. It's a different aspect rather than the religious part. How does that interest you in funding what we do? Is that something that is realistic in receiving funds for?
As a community foundation, we would consider it. We would consider either. We fund the community regardless of, you know, whether it's secular, or whether it's aspects of ones that have a religious element to it. It's not something that we would be precluded from. We look at everything that comes in specifically. So I've seen other things that come in that have, you know, Christian elements, Jewish elements, and they've been considered. Healthcare and SPITs, you know, probably wouldn't fit directly under what I'm hearing you say is the thresholds, but I'd have to explore a little bit more.
We don't, by contrast, support religious instruction. So we have worked with churches if they provide meals or do other work to folks regardless of whether or not they are a member of a faith or have interest in a faith. But if you are describing a religious instruction, which I'm kind of inferring from what you described, that would not be something we would support.
We would have an issue with that too, with the religious piece. They're trying to remain neutral. The other bit is, let's say you are neutral, but these are the children that you're trying to help, the students that you're trying to help. You're going to compete against other organizations that are doing something similar, and then it boils down to who has the better programs, where are the needs, what's the demographic, income demographic possibly of these children that you're addressing versus other groups. So it's a tough situation and a difficult decision. But all these things are considered, and I wouldn't say no to you. I would say make the application and let the committee vet it.
I'm assuming you're a 501c3, and I would say it's all about impact. How are you helping the children? What's the outcome of your mission, and how many children will be benefited, and what does that impact? And then obviously, naturally, we would support that.
Another question from the group was asked about smaller organizations that don't have development staff. Sometimes it's difficult to get in the door, set aside time, and vet some of their ideas with you personally or via phone call. Any thoughts for the smaller orgs that sometimes don't have the capacity to reach out? Is an email synopsis, a one-page white paper on what they do, is that sufficient to again, gauge your interest, and is that preferable than no touch at all before they ask?
It's our position, and we're directed as representatives, as consultants, to not steer you in one direction or the other, not decision what you're doing. We want you to make a complete application, tell your story, provide a detailed description so that a group of people, individuals, can evaluate the application. So that would be my instruction to you. Just be thorough. We don't necessarily want to meet with you and encourage or discourage. All we're trying to do is learn if a meeting would take place. The group needs to make the decision. And you will always be encouraged to make the application if you're so inclined.
I think it's a real problem. I mean, there were folks here from the Wright Center. I also see friends from Geisinger, and they have the ability to write phenomenal proposals like on a daily basis. I mean, they just have that kind of bandwidth in their development departments and that level of expertise. And so it can be much harder for smaller organizations if you are an ED who has to do your grant writing on the weekends, or a board member who's doing it, with a, how to write grants for dummies kind of a book. It can be really hard to kind of piece it together. And we get that. I think that one of the things that I would encourage then, if you are a smaller organization, is to really invest the minimal time that you have well. So do the research. Kurt and his organization at NCAC have great resources to help you identify who are the most likely funders for you, so that you're not spending a lot of time and energy writing a proposal for a funder who just isn't likely to fund you. So if you can do that kind of work ahead of time, then you can really invest your precious time in the places where it's most likely to be fruitful for you. And then there are foundations who welcome the opportunity to talk to you, and I would say take advantage of that, because often someone will have an idea of one project they want to present to us, but really it's your third or fourth option that's really the best option for us. And so my colleague Jeff Smith, who's in the back, he spends a significant amount of his time meeting with nonprofits and determining what's the best match between your need and our foundation's interests. And so I think that is particularly helpful for smaller nonprofits.
Not a lot to add other than emails are fine ways to gauge and vet potential ideas. We welcome emails. We can follow up with a call, et cetera, but feel free to kind of run things by us in that fashion. No problem with that.
I'm going to ask one question, particular of interest for me, but I'm sure it's for other groups too. Strategic planning. All good organizations do it often. Smaller organizations, mid-sized organizations have a tough time carving out sufficient board time and staff time to do it properly and to also look externally. Any best practices that you have related to strategic plan, specifically asking for funding for it? I've been talking with many groups, and the impetus, or there's something stopping them from applying for this funding sometimes, is their own time, their board time. And I'm considering different approaches to our organization and how we're doing it, and saying not only do we need a consultant to write the plan, we need some help for some quick implementation from the first couple of things suggested, sometimes administrative or internal. But would you consider an ask that would be somewhere between 10 to 25,000 that would include consulting and some basic implementation immediately afterward, whether it's rebranding, messaging?
It's a great question. I remember when I started out in this role, we were seeing such an influx of strategic plan applications that I think the collective committee consensus was, let's have a broad-based strategic planning seminar where we funded a consultant to help with mini strategic plans across 25 nonprofits. That was back in 2013. And then since then, of course, you have the capacity building. But I think now we're seeing that, yeah, these things are critical, but there's also still the need to help organizations individually at some level. And so I think, we're of the mindset that, yes, if an organization really, you can think of potentially is thinking about a change, or they're at this crossroads and they're really looking at needing to bring on a strategic planner and the implementation phase, I think it's definitely something we would consider in terms of a capacity funding strategy, you know. And I think that the range that Kurt said to me is exactly what we would be thinking the range would be. So, yes.
And I would agree that we think that strategic plans are really important. You know, just having that opportunity to just take a step back from the day-to-day, and the board and the leadership team and the staff be on the same page about who are we, what's our unique value, what are really the challenges that we're facing, where do we want to go over the next few years is really critical. And there are a variety of ways of doing that. Sometimes it's okay to do that with a skilled board member. Sometimes there's a role that the ED can play in leading an activity like that. But there's also great value in having external support. We're doing our own right now. It's our first one, and we did bring in external consultants for it. And so I think that it can range in size and scope. It's definitely something that we welcome the opportunity to fund.
I think the strategic planning is tying into this focus that we're beginning to evolve into with regard to leadership and capacity building. That's all about planning and identifying needs and so on and so forth. So I think we're sort of moving in small steps in that direction to cover that topic and that thought. So I think there's more to come that will be directed to, that we're able to do, hopefully at some point. But for now, it's our focus areas, and again, the initiative that's sort of coming out at this point, which I don't have all the details of, it's going to move us, I think, a little bit in that direction.
I'll be honest, I don't see us funding a strategic plan unless it was a group of nonprofits that got together, and there was, like Laura said, it would bring value to the entire nonprofit world. But if one organization came to us, asked to fund a consultant to come in to help them develop a strategic plan, it would be a tough sell.
Hello, Sandy Snyder from the Diocese of Scranton. Quick question about, a lot of you have been the first ones in. I think, Latita, you mentioned the Weinberg would not be the first one in. They want 50% of funding raised. In a case where you are looking for a program to have someone be the first one in, but there's a multifaceted development program, perhaps significant major gifts and a significant annual campaign, how positively would you look on, say, an organization being willing to put up X amount of its own funding, or a major donor as a first one in, so to speak, as opposed to another foundation in the beginning stages?
Skin in the game is really big. So if you're putting up your own money for a project, I think that's important. We would go in first, but the grant would be contingent upon you raising the other funding before we dispersed.
So is this program oriented?
Mostly program.
Okay. I think we would consider it the same way Kevin did. Who is coming to the table? And yes, we only want to be a piece or a portion of what's happening. And again, you're going to have to demonstrate the need, the want, the collective impact of why we would do this. But others have to participate before we would also jump in.
I think Weinberg has that rule specifically for capital, so I don't want to misquote them, but it's specifically around capital. They have very specific guidelines about when they want to enter. But as far as program, I think that they're probably more, they have greater flexibility. And I feel the same way. I mean, we would welcome the opportunity, you know, to be part at any phase.
Depending on the size and the scope and the nature of it, I think, you know, we would be willing to be a first responder to that. I think the key is the plan, not just, you know, who is, I mean, it said who is coming to the table, but is there really a plan in place that first investor feels like there really is likelihood of success? But yeah, I think, again, I go back to the innovation. That's part of really, I think, what we're here for.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you all for attending. Thank you. One more round of applause for our speakers. Thank you for attending. Hopefully you have everything on the agenda necessary for the next upcoming workshops and also in Laura's presentation. And with that, we will send a follow-up email with some of the information requested from you all today and whatever else we find in the evaluation. Thank you.